My name is Commissioner Frank Avila, and I'm a commissioner at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. And today, the name of our show is Why Fund Environmental Research. And today I have as my guest Dr. Thomas Theis. Thomas holds a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science in Civil Engineering at the University of Notre Dame, and he holds a doctorate degree in Environmental Engineering from the University of Notre Dame. Thank you for being on our show, Dr. Theis.
Thank you very much, Frank.
And Dr. Theis is the director of the Institute for Environmental Science and Policy at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Now, Dr. Theis, tell us about the Institute for Environmental Science and Policy at the University of Illinois, Chicago.
Well, Frank, we have to go back about almost 10 years now, when a group of faculty at the university from several departments got together and tried to brainstorm what the future of environmental research would be. And they went off and had a retreat for a couple of days and came up with a website and ultimately a proposal for a new cross-disciplinary institute at the university. What they saw was that not only are environmental problems getting more complex, but they're getting much more larger regions, encompassing much larger regions. And in fact, some of them, like climate change, are global in nature. So they put the proposal into the university procedures, and it came back a couple of years later approved. So the institute was started up in 1999, and I came along a couple of years later as the first permanent director.
And you know, you mentioned that the environment here in the Chicagoland area, and you also mentioned global. It appears that everything is global nowadays, and so we, you know, what we do here in Chicago might have an effect. You know, like at the Water Reclamation District, when we treat wastewater, we treat wastewater here in Cook County. We discharge the effluents into our channels. It goes into the Des Plaines River. It goes into the Illinois River. It goes into the Mississippi, down to the Gulf of Mexico. So the way we treat our wastewater has an environmental effect always down, going down to the Gulf of Mexico. And that's not global, but that's national. So I think anything we do here in the Chicago area might be national or global now.
That's certainly true. And then the converse is also true, and that is as climate change shifts in the world at large, it'll have an impact on how the region treats its wastewater as well.
That's true, because you know, I saw a show on the History Channel. I like to watch that show, and it was about drought, and it shows that in the next 10 years or maybe 20 years, our water supply in different areas of the United States, people might be traveling up here to the Chicagoland area because we have water. We have Lake Michigan, as back in the 1930s when everyone was going to California because of the drought, or was that must have been before. But we may have the same situation here.
Well, certainly our supply of fresh water is a plus for the area.
Yes. Now, why is environmental research important, and why is it important to fund environmental research?
Frank, well, in the first instance, environmental research is important because our environment is very important to us as human beings. As I mentioned before, the environment is extremely complex. It's been estimated that the dollar value of the environmental services that we receive from our planet is in excess of $30 trillion. But far more important than the dollar amount is the fact that some of these services that we receive from the environment are simply irreplaceable. An example is climate regulation. We could never do that on our own on a planet like the Earth. Another example is the fact that it supplies us with oxygen to breathe, and so we can survive that way.
Yes, we do need oxygen. There is no doubt about it.
And there are numerous examples of these kinds of irreplaceable services.
Now, on the environment is caused by human impact sometimes. Often. And how does one solve this problem? Is it solving by passing the laws or by public information? I mean, how, we have this environmental research, and if we do have this, whatever research that we're going to do to solve the environment, then how does industry pick up on this research to implement the research, and how does the public be aware of it? We have to have these research businesses to implement it. The public has to be made aware of it. So how does everything get together?
Those are difficult questions that you're asking. Well, of course, ideally, good policy should be based on good science. There's more to it than science. There are other factors that enter into decision-making, cost, naturally, various kinds of social factors. But if we go back in United States history, about 40 years or so, in the mid-60s, there was a widespread feeling among the American people that we had dirtied the environment very badly, and that it was beginning to impact our health. And there were statistics to show that this was indeed true.
And it just started 30, 40 years ago?
Well, there's a history before that, but the modern legal era began about 40 years ago. Prior to that, we had very few national laws on the environment, a few local public health kinds of laws, perhaps some conservation laws. But beginning in 1965 with the passage of the Clean Water Act, that was the first really national law affecting all the states. And there were many after that. There was a period of about 25 years where we passed a whole host of national laws. Probably the most important was the National Environmental Policy Act in 1970 that established the US EPA at the same time. That period came to an end in the early 1990s, and we're still...
And every state has their, like Illinois has their Illinois EPA.
That's right. And about that time, the various state EPAs or natural resource departments were established or reorganized as well. Yeah. So the entire infrastructure that we use to manage our environment came about during this period of time. So as I say, this also catalyzed a lot of research on the environment, and it's one of the great success stories of the 20th century because it mostly worked. We passed a lot of laws, we spent a lot of money, we did a lot of research to underpin our policy, and most of the visible signs of serious contamination disappeared. There was a time when if you were in Pittsburgh at noontime, it looked like midnight. There was a time when if you went out into Lake Michigan, there would be fish kills. Those times are past us now. In a way, that period was almost too successful because now since most of the visible signs of contamination are gone, the environment is perhaps not so much on people's minds, at least not until recently.
And by you mean recently, what is on people's mind now?
Well, of course, the Europeans have been ahead of us on this for quite some time, but the phenomenon of climate change, global climate change, is a very serious one. And we seem to have reached a tipping point now, at least in America, that yes, we're going to have to do something about this.
And by doing something about global change, has research just started, or have institutes like yourself been doing research anticipating that we need this type of research 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
Oh, certainly, certainly. We can trace global change research back perhaps 100 years or so, but it didn't get going strongly until the past 20 years. And the evidence has been accumulating because of the research that we do, not only how serious this is going to be, but also what kinds of things we're going to have to do to change our policies and our behaviors in the future.
You know, here in the United States, we have a farm bill that they passed for a 5-year period, and it's billions and billions of dollars.
It is.
And I attended a conference, and they were talking about organic farming. And one of the sessions was that the reason why we should go organic farming is because it will help the global warming of the earth, because if they do organic farming, the plants will need more CO2s because they are not using the pesticides, the fertilizers. They're using just natural fertilizer, and this way it doesn't destroy the soil as much.
Well, certainly there's much to be said for organic farming to pesticide-free farming.
So everything is coming into play how to solve global warming. So is there any one major thing to solve global warming, or is your institute doing anything and doing any research in global warming?
It'll be many things. At UIC, at the University of Illinois at Chicago, we do lots of research related to climate change and related environmental problems from all across the campus, from the natural sciences, from engineering, public health. You know, we have the only public health school in the entire state of Illinois. From economics, from business, from urban planning. They're all engaged in one way or another in problems related to the environment, including some of these large regional problems that you speak of, and of course global problems as well. At the Institute, we have specialized in the fields of industrial ecology and life cycle assessment. Industrial ecology started about 15 years ago, and it was a simple question that was posed, and that went like this: why is it that human systems create so much waste, but natural systems hardly create any waste at all? And that spawned an entire new field of study where people began to ask questions related to that. I'll give you an example. If you buy a car, let's say it weighs 2,000 pounds, 1 ton.
A ton, yes.
To make that car, the factory and all the steps preceding the factory, from the extraction of raw materials to refining and purification, assembly of the car itself, that generated about 6,000 pounds of waste. In other words, the waste to product ratio was about 3 to 1. Now, if we continue to follow that car into its use in society, in other words, we buy a car and we drive it around, put a lot of gasoline, oil, tires, and so on and so forth through it, that waste to product ratio balloons to 10 to 1.
10 to 1.
So industrial ecology spawned the field of life cycle assessment. That's where we look at all the materials and all the energy and all the impacts throughout the entire life cycle of a product, from cradle to grave, as we say.
And there's no way to recycle that waste product?
Sometimes there are. Sometimes there aren't. And lots of new technologies have come along over the past several years to improve our recyclability. It's not just a technical problem, though. It's a social problem. We have to invent some of the societal structures and management techniques to make it attractive to recycle things. We also have to design products so that they're more easily recyclable. Recyclable.
That's a key, probably. Now, there's a new product out there. I don't know if you call it product, but they call it nanoscale.
Yes, indeed.
And that's going to grow. I don't know how many products out there that are using nanoscale right now, but maybe in the near future we're going to have a lot of products using nanoscale. Could you explain to the audience what research the Institute is doing?
Well, you're quite right. There are about, last count, about 500 products on the market now that use what we call nanostructured materials. These are structures that are extremely small. A nanometer is about a billionth of a meter in size.
And for instance, our hair, one strand of a hair is so thin, and that is even smaller than
yeah, the thickness of a hair, you could probably fit about 10,000 nanometers. Yeah. So these structures are extremely small. That gives them some unique properties that are being commercialized as we speak now. And there will be many, many applications that have yet to be developed. The 500 products that I talked about is the tip of the iceberg for nanotechnology. But it does raise some interesting and in some case respect to the environmental impact.
And you know, and this is why it's so important that we should fund environmental research for nanoscale also, because it is relatively new, and we know very we don't know too much about it, what effect it's going to have on the environment, and if it's going to be good or bad. And research is going to be, and your institute probably going to be one of the leading institutes, maybe in the nation or the world, in doing nanoscale research.
Well, that's very kind of you. There's lots of research going on at the nanoscale now, and environmental research has lagged behind, but it's coming along now. One of the things we're looking at is what is the, if you will, environmental footprint to make nanoparticles or products containing nanostructured materials. And there's been very little work done on this, but I'll give you one example. One kind of nanoproduct that's been around for quite some time is in computers. The chips that we use, the memory chips and the logic chips, contain nanostructured thin films. Those create quite a bit of waste when they're manufactured. There was a relatively famous article that came out a few years ago in one of the environmental journals. It was called the 1.7 kilogram microchip. And the reason was because the waste to product ratio of making microchips is about 1,000 to 1.
1,000 to 1?
So for every gram of microchips that you make, you get about 1,000 grams or a couple of pounds of waste. So this is just one example that worries us about the impact of nanostructured materials on the environment.
Because if it ever, I know that we, computer life cycle, probably they're coming up with new technology in computers every 6 months or a year or maybe a year and a half. And
the cycle time is very short.
And, yes. and that cycle time, everyone wants to get the newest thing out there. And what do they do with their old computers? They may give it to charity or maybe just throw it away after a couple years or 2 or 3 years.
Well, there's certainly a lot of downcycling that goes on. It remains to be seen how this will work out. Right now, speaking of computers, in the United States, we recycle only about 6 or 7%.
6 or 7%.
Yeah, the rest of them are probably stored. Some of them are junked and end up in landfills.
And this is the problem we have. As I mentioned, I'm a commissioner at the Water Reclamation District, and we treat wastewater. And a lot of this ingredients, compounds or whatever ingredients in our personal care products, comes through our sewage treatment plant. And we may or may not treat these different compounds and ingredients, and it goes through our sewage treatment plant into the environment, either in our biosolids, and what we call biosolid is fertilizer that we'll probably give to farmers that grow crops, or it goes into our effluents where we discharge into our channels. So we have to be concerned on nanoscale, because you're talking about computers. Maybe nanoscale is not only on hardware also, but it could be on personal care products.
Absolutely. One example from the past, actually, one of the problems with wastewater sludge, as you know, has been heavy metals in the past. They get through the waste treatment process and they end up in the solids. And you can't just spread those around in the environment. They contain toxic materials.
And you cannot give them to a farmer to grow crops for human consumption.
No, that's right. And of course, the raw materials, many of the materials that are used in nanostructured materials are heavy metals.
Yes.
So we found another use for them, which is good because we need them. On the other hand, we have to manage it responsibly.
Yes. And so, we have the U.S. EPA here in America. And we're talking about the global environment, because what China is doing will have a global environmental effect here in the United States. So our other parts of the world have a U.S. EPA like we have it here, like Environmental Protection Agency. Does Europe have one?
Europe has many. Each of the individual countries has their own EPA. They don't always call it EPA, but it's the same concept. But they also have what passes for the national level in Europe. The European Union also has its own environmental commissions, and Japan, of course, has many environmental structures, management structures in place. China does too.
Now, what difference can you compare the difference what we're doing here as compared what the other agencies in Europe is doing? Is there a difference on policies and procedures and research?
There are some. In the United States, a long-standing principle that we've used in managing the environment is the concept of risk management.
Risk management. And what does risk management mean?
Well, most people can relate intuitively to risk. Every time you get in an airplane, there's some risk associated with harm coming to you. Get in your car, for example. When it comes to the environment, we tend to regulate chemicals or biochemicals or bacteria. And so most of our laws are geared towards regulating the risk associated with those.
And the risk is maybe they'll have an adult age of they put an adult age of 20, or the risk will be at a child. At what level do they set that standard, or is it different for different type of risk management for different products?
That's a good question. There are several ways to do it. Most risk statistics are expressed in terms of a lifetime risk of, say, exposure to Chicago air, for example. But we also seek out sensitive populations, almost always minority populations of one sort or another, to see what the impacts are on them. Because we have to protect the weakest among us, obviously. And so the most sensitive populations are the ones that tend to guide standard setting and the criteria that we use in assessing the state of the environment. But I want to go back to other kinds of policies that are in effect. In Europe, and I think in Japan as well, they tend to use what's called the precautionary principle as their guiding light rather than just risk management. Of course, they're concerned with risk as well.
Sure.
But the precautionary principle simply says, look, we're going to be pretty cautious before we approve, say, new chemicals to be put into commerce, or in the case of nanotechnology, new nanostructures to be put into commercial use. One consequence of that is they have many more regulations than we do in the United States. Some people would say that's not always the best. But it is a contrast in the way things are done. I think what you're seeing is the European model of management of the environment and the U.S. model are slowly beginning to converge.
And you know, you're talking about we practice risk management here, and they practice precautionary. So we must have manufacturers here in the United States that manufacture product slowly for the United States, and then they must have a different assembly line for the European market.
Well, they don't like to do that.
I mean, but we the United States is a first world country, so we probably supply a lot of products, or maybe give specifications out there. And so if that's the case, where we have different type of standards, and they may not allow ingredients or compounds in their products, but will allow it, so they'll probably have two different types of products that they're out there selling.
Well, there are certainly cases like that. Even in our own country, for automobiles, California has much more stringent standards for emissions of air contaminants than most of the rest of the states. So some of that goes on, but most companies would prefer to have one way to make their products, if they could.
Now, what kind of environmental research and other activities are being carried out at the University of Illinois Chicago Environmental Institute?
Well, there's a wide range of research that's ongoing, everything from basic science and environmental science to new technologies for control of contaminants and understanding how they behave in treatment processes, to policy research, economics, urban planning, and of course public health, as I say.
And how large of a staff do you have?
Well, the Institute engages faculty from across the university. So at any one time we have between 40 and 50 people who are associated with the Institute.
And these scientists that you have, they're the main problem that they're having. What will be the main problem that your institute has right now? Is it the problem in funding, or is it the problem in public information, explaining what you need out there, or what are some of the problems?
Well, certainly funding is an extremely important one.
And why do you feel that funding is a problem? Is funding a problem in Europe when they do their research? Or is it a different type of attitude, how the United States address their funding for research as compared to Europe?
Well, generally there's more money available in Europe. Unfortunately, it's not accessible to U.S. scientists for the most part. It's important because doing environmental research is expensive. It's not just a question of paying people to do it, which of course one has to do, but we engage students. We support students this way. We have to buy supplies, expensive pieces of equipment, and all this adds up considerably. Again, the environment is extremely complex, and trying to unravel all the relationships is a challenging task. I would say that at the University of Illinois at Chicago right now, If you add up all the funding, ongoing funding for research, it's probably about $5 million per year.
And your $5 million in research, I think once the research is completed and it could be implemented, as you mentioned at the start of the show, the natural resource is trillions of dollars. And this $5 million that you have at your institute, I think will contribute to maybe it could be who knows, billions or trillions of dollars in coming back to America.
We have to think of research as an investment. That's absolutely true.
Oh, yes. And because our environment is changing. I know that at the Water Reclamation District, we do have a large staff at the in our research institute. We have 31. I forgot how many employees, but we do have a very large staff there.
Yes.
And so any other remarks towards the environment and what you like to see at your institute?
Well, of course, we always want to grow and expand and include more people. The institute sometimes acts as a broker. That is, when complex problems come our way, we pull together people from across the university and even outside the university to help solve those problems. We have our own research, which we discussed earlier as well.
Now, at the Water Reclamation District, we have scientists working for us, and we do give money out for research also. And do you think there's ever going to come a time where the scientists and the environmental groups are going to clash?
Well, they already have clashed.
They already have
many times. But I think that ultimately, we're all working towards the same goal, a livable world, or a livable environment wherever we are. I think it's best when scientists identify themselves as scientists and render their judgments accordingly. And then if they want to step into the role of an advocacy of one kind or another, that's okay too. We encourage that, but then they should identify themselves that way. I think that would go a long way towards bringing these groups together. Sometimes it's a question of tactics. Most scientists are more conservative in their approach because there's always uncertainty in science, and we have to just learn to live with that. Whereas oftentimes in advocacy proceedings of one sort or another, it's either-or arrangement.
Yes, and there has to be a balance there.
Absolutely.
It has to be doing research, environmental research, and this is particularly what your institute is concentrating, just on environmental research.
Yes, we are.
Setting the proper type of research to help our environment, not for 5 years or 10 years, but for a longer period of time.
Well, that's the paradigm of sustainability. We're being asked for the first time to take into account multiple generations yet to be born.
Yeah.
In our decision.